American Comics. Defying Comprehension, Using Dimensional Demons for Alchemy. Chapter 41. Professor McGonagall took Li Hong on a tour inside the castle and then led him to the teacher's lounge. How about you stay here? This is usually a space for teachers to rest, and there are also some lounges. As Professor McGonagall spoke, she drew her wand and lightly tapped the wall, causing a door that had no handle and was flush against the wall to open. Inside was a simple single room. A bed occupied most of the space, but there was a large window that allowed for decent light. Li Hong nodded, feeling that it was already quite good to have a place to settle down. As dinner time approached, Professor McGonagall soon took Li Hong to the Great Hall. Upon entering the hall, he felt the buzz of noise. It was filled with students, and the atmosphere was quite lively. With Li Hong's appearance, many curious eyes turned towards him. Eventually, he took a seat at the front of the hall among the professors, with Dumbledore sitting beside him, offering a warm smile. "Mr. Li, are you satisfied with your accommodations?" "Haha, of course, even if you aren't, this is the best we can offer, so please forgive us." Dumbledore inquired with a twinkle in his eye. "Yes, I am quite satisfied." "That's good to hear. Do you have any plans for what's next?" "From what Professor McGonagall said, there is a library here. I wonder if I could borrow some books, as my understanding of magic is quite limited." "Certainly, but since this is your first exposure, the books in the restricted section might not be suitable for you. Feel free to borrow from the other sections." "Okay." Li Hong nodded, knowing that most books in the restricted section were related to dark magic, though he was not interested in dark magic at all. To him, dark magic held little significance. Like righteousness and evil, neither was inherently more powerful. Both paths led to the same end, with no real distinction. "What is your impression of our Hogwarts students, Mr. Li?" Dumbledore suddenly asked. Full of vitality, Li Hong replied briefly, his gaze directed forward at the dining students. There were clearly 4 long tables, probably corresponding to the 4 houses. His gaze swept across the faces of these students, and he indeed recognized quite a few familiar ones. "Are you interested in becoming a professor at Hogwarts?" Dumbledore immediately asked, appearing to have been considering Li Hong for a while now. Li Hong shook his head and casually replied, "My power and magic are quite different, they're not suitable for Hogwarts students." Although the essence of power isn't vastly different, can cultivating immortality and magic be considered the same? "That's a pity," Dumbledore said somewhat regretfully. He indeed valued Li Hong's capabilities but wouldn't force the issue since Li Hong had stated his position so clearly. The two continued to chat casually, and soon they finished their meal. Li Hong returned to his room in the staff lounge. Feeling bored, and realizing he couldn't use his phone here, he began to practice as usual. However, he found that practicing actually accelerated his synchronization speed, which wasn't bad at all. In the blink of an eye, the sky outside brightened, and a long bell rang out. Li Hong opened his eyes, his gaze bright, feeling the power within him. This night of practice had indeed brought his cultivation back to the foundational stage, and his magical power surged abundantly. At this rate, he should be able to restore his full strength by tomorrow morning, ready to open the stone door and return at any time. The students at the school had already begun classes, and Li Hong headed to the Hogwarts library to start reading. He primarily focused on some spellbooks. Although they differed from the powers he mastered, he still found them quite engaging. Time flew by, and by the afternoon, he closed the book in his hands. He had read through all the spellbooks he could find at a rapid pace and gained a considerable understanding of magic. He returned the book to the shelf, walked out of the library, and strolled all the way outside the castle. Finally, he stopped under a large tree, bent down, and picked up a fallen dry twig from the ground, which was just the right length. He planned to make a wand, which was quite simple for him. There was no shortage of wands within the school. With just a glance, he had a general idea of how wands functioned. Essentially, it was just a stick that could better control magical power. Li Hong could discern the essence of magical power. It could be said to be innate or derived from the power of one's bloodline, essentially fixed. The purity of the bloodline determined the quantity of magical power. Therefore, in Li Hong's eyes, the theory of pure blood wasn't without reason. Magical power stemmed from one's lineage, and once mixed with Muggle blood, it would dilute the lineage of newborn wizards, and naturally, magical power would be a bit less. Of course, the difference wouldn't be too significant. This applies to wizards from wizarding families. If a wizard is born into a Muggle family, it would be quite interesting. He discovered that these so-called genetically mutated Muggle wizards sometimes possess magical power that is not inferior to pureblood wizards, but it's akin to a lottery. Wizards from wizarding families have guaranteed results, but Muggle-born wizards do not. It's all a matter of luck. However, in Li Hong's view, whether pureblood or half-blood, the level of magical power is just average. When compared to the realms of cultivators, it roughly equates to the Qi refining stage. Naturally, they are stronger than ordinary people, but they have not completely transcended the realm of mortals. Yet, compared to the magical power of cultivators, their magic is quite chaotic and disordered, which is why wands are necessary. A wand is akin to the rifling in a firearm. It has a specific trajectory, and when magical power is infused, it forcibly molds the magic into an orderly state, thereby facilitating the casting of spells. And with Li Hong's refining techniques, crafting such a wand couldn't be simpler. The creation of magical artifacts is much more complex. It merely involves the forcible binding of magical power. Li Hong did not use spiritual fire for crafting. Instead, he pinched his fingers together and let his fingertips glide over the branch, as magical power flowed out from within him. Wherever the magical power touched, it was transformed. In terms of refining, it meant using powerful magical energy to eliminate impurities from the refining material and refine its essence. By the time Li Hong's fingers glided over the top of the branch, it had undergone a tremendous transformation and had become the embryo of a magical artifact. All that was left was to imprint the corresponding magical seal into it. Li Hong formed a spell and directly implanted it into the branch, which soon emitted a faint light that quickly converged. Thus, the wand was successfully crafted, and it could also be considered a magical artifact. Unlike the wands of ordinary wizards, this wand not only can forcibly restrain magical power, but it can also efficiently channel magical power. Why? Under equal magical power, the energy output through a wand will decrease by about half. However, the wand crafted by Li Hong consumes less than 10% of its magical energy, making its power roughly double that of an ordinary wand. But his wand is far more than just that. The principle of a wand is to allow magical energy to be output in an orderly manner, but the principle of a magical artifact is different. If it was simply a matter of outputting one's own magical power, why even bother with artifacts? One could just use spells directly, and it would be much more convenient. The charm of a magical artifact lies in its ability to enhance the power of magical energy, allowing one to achieve effects that would otherwise be unattainable. For example, the wand he currently holds in his hand is like this. Although it was crafted casually by Li Hong, with his skill in artifact crafting, even a casual creation could not produce a low-quality magical item. Thus, this wand can actually amplify its power to approximately 5 times. In comparison, the magical output of other wands and this wand's output will have a difference of 10 times. For any wizard, this could be considered a divine artifact. Li Hong grasped the wand and pointed ahead. A beam of magical light shot out and landed in the empty space. Though he does not possess magical power, he can simulate it using magical energy. Moreover, after studying the spellbook for an entire afternoon, Li Hong has thoroughly researched magic. To some extent, it is similar to spells, but it requires incantations, which can be quite troublesome. In Li Hong's view, the reason magic requires incantations is due to the chaotic nature of magical energy. The so-called incantation actually serves to put one's mental will into a fixed state, causing the magic to take effect. Incantations are like keys. Different keys can open different doors. However, for Li Hong, he can create a Wan Nang Yaoshi universal key, so there is no need for such incantations. Of course, even Li Hong must admit that magical power has its unique advantages, which is its spontaneity. This is something that magical energy finds hard to achieve, but each has its own benefits. Li Hong then put away the wand and returned to the castle. There's no need to go back to the library, he no longer requires it. He has not forgotten that the most important goal of this trip is still to collect materials for alchemy. Although there are many magical plants in the Forbidden Forest, Li Hong does not wish to pick them himself, as that would be too inefficient. In a place with a market, it's naturally faster to spend money. However, he currently has no currency from this world, so he needs to earn some galleons, remembering that this is the name of the wizarding currency. Li Hong walked through the castle, pondering what items sell best in this world. Wands, potions, flying broomsticks. In another world, Li Hong's desire to make money wasn't strong, as cash didn't lead to anything he found particularly interesting. But this world is different. Galleons can be exchanged for alchemical resources, which is enough to pique his interest. In the end, Li Hong believes his focus should be on potions. Do wands really need to be that powerful in this world? Especially in a peaceful era. Although there are still many crises facing the British wizarding world at the moment, if a crisis doesn't erupt, there isn't much need for them. Those who need them are ambitious. Wands in their hands would only increase their karmic burden. The same goes for potions. They are not a necessity. As for flying broomsticks, he could indeed produce some as luxury items to sell, but he has no assurance that they would sell well. Therefore, Li Hong feels that potions are still more reliable. Although there is no demand for them from wizards, he can create the demand. Li Hong already has a preliminary plan in mind. It's best to target all wizards as potential customers so that he can definitely make a significant profit. After all, if every person gives him 1 galleon, he can instantly amass a great deal of wealth. The current question is how to make all wizards give him 1 galleon each, or even 10 galleons. Li Hong has already found the answer within himself. It is magic power. The foundation of a wizard's existence is magic power. The strength of spells depends on this power. However, even wizards are not aware of this issue, because to them, a wizard's magic power is roughly equal, so no one cares. What they pursue in terms of bloodline is actually just a quest for privilege, not a true understanding of the slight differences in magic power between purebloods and half-bloods. But what if he could create a potion that increases a wizard's magic power? If the magic power of the wizards around him suddenly doubled compared to theirs, would they still be able to remain calm? A difference in magic power by double would be very evident when casting spells. For example, the Iron Armor charm that Li Hong knows. It's a protective spell that can block attacks from other spells. But if the magic power is doubled, then the Iron Armor charm could withstand a few more hits. Secondly, if one were to cast an offensive spell, under the condition that the magical power doubles, the Iron Cloak spell could be broken faster. Other spells are the same. Once the magical power increases, the difference becomes very apparent. Creating demand when there is none. When someone around is doing it, everyone tends to follow suit, ultimately leading to having to buy his potions. Although it's not very ethical, it is indeed a measure that benefits wizards. Although in the end, the overall level has risen to the point where it feels like there has been no improvement, there are still changes for the magical creatures outside. Unknowingly, Li Hong stopped outside an office. Looking up, he found it was Snape's office, so it wasn't a mistake after all. After all, potion making requires materials, and as the professor of potions class, Snape must have collected many magical materials. Li Hong stood there quietly waiting for Snape to finish class, without giving a thought to the lingering grudge between him and Snape. Uncertain how much time had passed, the class bell rang, and many students appeared in the hallway. A short while later, Li Hong saw Snape's figure approaching him. When he saw Li Hong, the already gloomy expression on Snape's face turned even darker, and he had already drawn his wand. He hadn't forgotten the grudge from yesterday. Seeing Snape's actions, Li Hong couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He had indeed forgotten this matter since he rarely held grudges. Now that he had already regained his foundation establishment stage, he could easily suppress him, so there wasn't much to worry about. However, since the other party wanted to play, he could accompany him for a bit. He then reached into his bag and pulled out his wand. Seeing the wand in Li Hong's hand, Snape immediately understood the other's intention. This was to duel him, which suited him just fine. The only thing he feared was Li Hong's inexplicable techniques, but when it came to magical duels, he wouldn't back down. Snape waved his wand directly across an empty corridor, and in the instant his wand pointed at Li Hong, a magical light burst forth. The speeding magical beam almost arrived in an instant. However, compared to a bullet, it was slightly slower, at least allowing one to see the trace of the magical light flying towards them. Li Hong appeared calm and composed. Seeing the hex coming at him, he leisurely raised his wand, using his magical power to simulate infusing magic into the wand, causing it to gather and not disperse at the tip. In the end, he precisely directed it onto the hex, making the magical light dissipate in an instant. He had surprisingly negated the effect of the curse with pure magical power. Seeing this, Snape's expression slightly darkened, realizing he had encountered a dual master, and immediately continued casting spells. Li Hong kept raising his wand, blocking all the incoming curses with an intercepting motion. The corridor was filled with magical lights flying out like bullets, various gleams flashing within Hogwarts Castle. This naturally drew the attention of the students leaving class. "It's Snape, he's dueling with someone." Suddenly someone noticed and exclaimed. Instantly the surrounding students hurried to the corridor railings, looking down at Snape and Li Hong from above. Before long, the upstairs and downstairs corridors were crowded with students, each of them wide-eyed at this spectacle. "Who is that person? I've seen him in the Great Hall, could he be a new professor?" Someone immediately asked, beginning to discuss excitedly. "No, I heard from someone else that he is a traveler from outside, temporarily staying at Hogwarts." Someone answered right away. Hogwarts had no secrets. When Li Hong first appeared, someone had already inquired about him, and it spread quickly. "He looks so cool, do you think he can beat Snape?" Someone couldn't help but marvel, watching as Li Hong raised his hand and effortlessly blocked all of Snape's spells, appearing extremely composed, eliciting a sigh of admiration. "I don't know, but I hope he can," someone said, full of anticipation. Meanwhile, in another part of the corridor, the trio of Harry, Ron, and Hermione were also watching their duel. "Is this the person Hagrid was talking about? He looks really strong," red-haired Ron exclaimed, eyes wide, his voice raised. "According to Hage, this person's methods are quite unusual, unlike our magic. Perhaps he can defeat Snape," Harry said excitedly, wishing he could also jump in and cast a severe curse at Snape. "It's hard to say. Snape is the head of Slytherin, his strength is at least among the best. He probably hasn't been serious yet." Hermione crossed her arms with the book against her chest, analyzing rationally. In fact, this was true. Snape hadn't yet gone all out, he was testing the waters. However, the results of the test weren't optimistic. The way Li Hong used his wand to block the curses indicated that the opponent was not a simple one. But Snape wasn't simple either. The test was over, he was starting to get serious. In the next moment, Li Hong sensed a change. He saw that Snape's spellcasting speed had increased significantly, it was almost instantaneous, without any pauses in between. Several curses surged forward all at once, not only released faster but also flying towards them at an accelerated speed. It was completely different from the previous attacks. To the students, it was as if they had pressed the fast-forward button, watching at least twice the regular speed. "Oh my!" Ron's eyes widened in disbelief, thinking that he had previously underestimated Snape, believing he was merely older and knew a few more spells than they did. He thought that if a fight broke out, it would be hard to say who would win. But now, he realized he had thought too simply. With Snape's current display of strength, he might just have drawn his wand and already had several curses hurled at him. The curses came in an instant. Li Hong slightly raised his eyebrows, no longer defending with his wand, but rather releasing spells. He seized the initiative, instantly casting 3 curses with precise aim, countering the 3 incoming magical blasts completely. Seeing this, Snape's eyes turned cold. He could already sense that Li Hong was not easy to deal with, as his earlier display was enough to reveal his strength. Li Hong was even casting spells faster than him, and the speed of his curses was not inferior either. It should be noted that Snape could reach this level only through years of practice. On one hand, one must be thoroughly proficient with spells. Silent and wandless magic is the most basic requirement, only by achieving this can one be considered to have entered the realm. Almost through long-term practice, the speed of spellcasting can be gradually improved, the more one uses it, the faster the release. He could roughly achieve the level of casting 3 spells in an instant now. The speed at which the spells shot out also required substantial practice. This hinges on the magnitude of one's magical power. The more magic one injects into the wand, the faster the spells fly out. Young wizards don't have this concept, but a seasoned battle-hardened wizard understands this deeply. It's not that simple. It's not just about injecting more magical power into the wand. The energy that an ordinary wizard spends to cast a spell is a standard amount, and most wizards consume roughly equal amounts of magic power when casting the same spell. To increase the magic injection, specialized practice is required. Because magic is chaotic and difficult to control, achieving a larger amount of magic injection necessitates a higher level of mastery over chaotic magic, making it obedient so that it can be controlled. Mastering magic is a long taming process that also requires age-related accumulation. Li Hong appears very young, and it turns out he does even better than others. One can only say he has exceptional talent. There are always those who can achieve this and stand out, being powerful at a young age, just like Voldemort back in the day, and Albus Dumbledore when he was young. Hiss, how can they all be this strong? Harry asked incredulously, feeling as if the sky had fallen. The always unappealing Snape displaying such formidable strength was hard to bear, even if it was expected. It felt worse than being killed. The duel continued, with bursts of magical light shooting out like fireworks, the different colors reflecting continually on the shocked faces of the students watching in the corridor. At this moment, they began to understand why Snape was the head of Slytherin House. However, even though Snape's performance had already astonished the students, it still was no match for Li Hong, who appeared to handle it all quite easily. This caused students outside Slytherin House to feel a sense of anticipation, fixated on the scene, afraid that if they blinked, they would miss the exciting moment. Snape's face grew increasingly dark as the spells from the front were all blocked by Li Hong, who had yet to launch any attacks, clearly at ease with the situation. He immediately pointed his wand upwards. Magical light surged forth, not aimed at Li Hong but rather landing atop his head. In an instant, a number of snakes appeared out of thin air above him, descending with gaping bloody mouths towards Li Hong. Seeing this, Li Hong raised his wand and pointed at them, causing them to fly away in panic before they even landed, charging straight at Snape. They could only change target, flying towards Snape while revealing their bloody mouths and sharp fangs, attempting to bite a hole in Snape. Snape's expression darkened as he cast a counter curse, directly cancelling the conjured snake's summoning spell, causing the snakes to vanish in an instant. Snape then turned his wand towards the side. The spell targeted an iron armor standing nearby. In a flash, the armor exploded into a flurry of sharp blades, shooting straight at Li Hong. The blades were sharp and glimmering, slicing through the air at high speed. A barrage spell combined with a transfiguration spell. Li Hong remained unfazed, thrusting his wand forward. In a moment, blue flames erupted from the tip of his wand, shooting forth beams of magical light that collided with the incoming blades, sending them flying away and scattering to the ground with a clinking noise. The Sandstorm Charm. This was a spell Li Hong had seen in a relatively obscure book in the library, and it proved to be quite useful when cast. Fantastic. Harry's eyes sparkled behind his glasses, nearly bursting into applause, though he would only be applauding for Li Hong. Li Hong had all but figured out Snape's limits and was no longer prepared to drag out the match, opting to conclude the duel. He simply released a disarmament spell aimed at Snape. However, he invoked some power of the wand, enhanced by the special wand in his hand. A massive red magical light erupted from the tip of his wand, illuminating the somewhat dim castle, dazzling like a flare. If Snape's spells could be likened to rifle bullets, intense but no thicker than a pigeon egg, then the red magical light Li Hong released now resembled a cannonball, roughly the size of a bowling ball. His normally sized wand resembled a cannon barrel, instantly firing this terrifying red cannonball forth. The speed at which the spell shot out was akin to that of an actual cannonball. The red light, capable of illuminating the entire castle, flickered by in an instant. Snape's face turned bright red, his expression full of shock and confusion. However, upon seeing the blinding red light, he didn't even have time to consider defending or dodging before he was knocked away by the terrifying spell. He flew from one end of the corridor straight to the other, ultimately crashing into the wall before he finally stopped. A wand flew swiftly and landed in Li Hong's hand. In that moment, the entire castle fell silent as all the observing students stared blankly, their minds seemingly struggling to comprehend what had just happened. What did they see? Is that a spell? How could that possibly be a spell? Are you kidding me? A full half a minute passed before the dazed students came back to their senses. In the next moment, the entire castle roared. The boiling sound seemed like it was going to tear the roof off the castle. Oh my God, what did I just see? Was that a spell? Merlin, he must be the reincarnation of Merlin. Oh my heavens, he's not a wizard, he's a person transformed from a fire dragon, right? One by one, their expressions were excited, their faces flushed, they shouted crazily, their words meaningless, only emotions erupting. Everyone was like this, even the Slytherin students couldn't maintain their calm, not even caring about their headmaster's fate at this moment. The intense sound spread throughout the castle, people were excited and frantic, eagerly looking at Li Hong's calm face, almost as if they were looking at a deity. Harry and Ron were no different, so excited they couldn't speak, holding each other tightly, fists raised and waving in the air. Meanwhile, Hermione stared at this scene that defied her worldview, her mind a bit fuzzy, as if she was lacking oxygen. The last time something had so profoundly challenged her worldview was when she received her acceptance letter to Hogwarts. And the roaring sound soon attracted the professors' attention, whether it was McGonagall, Dumbledore, or the professors from other houses, they all appeared. Dumbledore's face was serious. He didn't know what had happened and wanted to ask a student to clarify, but each one was so excited they couldn't articulate their words, merely pointing at Li Hong by the corridor below. Of course, they had tried to calm the students down, but found they couldn't do anything. It seemed that only a magical calming potion would help them settle down a bit. Eventually, they reached the floor where Li Hong was. Seeing Snape lying unconscious at the end of the corridor, and Li Hong holding two wands in his hands, they quickly walked over. What happened? Dumbledore stopped in front of Li Hong, his tone very serious. Professor McGonagall swept past Li Hong and made her way toward Snape, clearly to check on Snape's condition. Professor Snape wanted to spar with me, so I obliged him. He should be quite satisfied. Li Hong said innocently, though the situation was indeed as he portrayed. Dumbledore's gaze was somewhat strange. It did not sound like a big issue, but his heart was filled with doubt. If it was just a duel, then why were the surrounding students so excited? Was it because Snape lost and it brought great joy? Although that was a possibility. Moreover, Snape was after all a professor of Slytherin. Dumbledore had some confidence in Snape's dueling skills, but why did Snape faint immediately and even lose his wand? What exactly had happened? He immediately inquired. Oh, they might be cheering for this duel. As for Professor Snape, I was careful and only used the disarming charm. Li Hong replied calmly, handing Snape's wand to Dumbledore. This was also due to the special nature of the disarming charm. It isn't an offensive spell, otherwise Snape wouldn't have just flown out so simply. As for why he fainted, a normal person would also faint from hitting a wall at that speed. Just then, Professor McGonagall came over, her expression grave as she said, "Severus is injured. I'll take him to Madame Pomfrey to have a look." Dumbledore didn't say anything, just nodded. Professor McGonagall briefly glanced at Li Hong, her expression complex and inscrutable, before turning to call a few students to help carry the unconscious Snape to the infirmary. "Didn't you say you can't do magic? And what about that wand?" Dumbledore was also confused by Li Hong's antics. He took Snape's wand, then looked at the wand in Li Hong's hand. From his understanding of wands, Li Hong's wand seemed somewhat rudimentary, like a twig casually picked up from the roadside. It was clear that it was not made by Ollivander. Wands produced by their family go through a series of processes, including oiling and drying to make their surfaces smooth. Moreover, in Dumbledore's eyes, Li Hong was an Eastern mystical force independent of magic. How could he suddenly know magic too? "I studied spell books in the library all day today and learned it. As for the wand, I made it myself," Li Hong replied honestly. However, this statement made Dumbledore raise an eyebrow. Can magic really be learned all at once? And in his perception, Li Hong had no magic at all. But in the end, Dumbledore could only helplessly accept this point. He let out a gentle sigh. He would have to ask Snape to find out if what he said was true. Dumbledore then went to the hospital wing to check on the situation, while Li Hong returned to the staff lounge. Although many young wizards from different grades trailed behind him, excitedly wanting to say something to Li Hong, they soon discovered that while he appeared to be walking leisurely, he was actually moving quickly. Even when they ran to catch up, they fell behind, ultimately having to watch him enter the staff lounge. Before long, it was dinner time, and Li Hong appeared in the Great Hall. Observant students immediately spotted him and whispered to their companions beside them. Gradually, the students, who had been discussing excitedly, quieted down, all eyes turning toward Li Hong with anticipation in their expressions. Before he even reached the professor's table at the front, the previously noisy environment fell silent. "Mr. Lee, can you tell us how you performed that spell?" Fred Weasley, a red-haired Gryffindor, stood up, looking at Li Hong with admiration, and curiously asked, as if he had even inquired about Li Hong's name. In that instant, the hall fell into silence, with every young wizard pricking up their ears to listen carefully. Having enough magical power is key, Li Hong replied without stopping his pace. "How can you increase magical power?" George Weasley also stood up, closely following up with the question. This made Li Hong pause for a moment, slowly turning around to face the two young Weasleys. "There are many ways, for example, meditation. It can help you control chaotic magical power and also increase your excess magical power. Li Hong answered generously. Of course, he only proposed a simple method. Meditation can indeed help them control chaotic magical power, and over many years, they could reach Snape's level, making spells both swift and strong. But as for increasing additional magical power, it's possible, but not much. It really depends on how one meditates. He didn't know what method Dumbledore used to possess magical power beyond the norm, far exceeding that of adult wizards and even reaching the realm of magical creatures. However, he had analyzed magical power, allowing him to simulate it with magical ability, so he knew that meditation does enhance magical power by developing the untapped potential of the body. But simply closing one's eyes and emptying the mind to meditate would not yield noticeable results. Thus, how one meditates is crucial, which falls into the realm of cultivation. He could easily create a meditation technique that effectively increases magical power, as simple as drinking water. However, it seems there are no such meditation techniques in the magical world, otherwise, there wouldn't be such little difference among wizards at Hogwarts, aside from Dumbledore. In addition, there are potions and some special magical plants that could also enhance magical power when consumed. If such a potion exists, why haven't I heard of it? The blonde Malfoy immediately stood up, eyes shining, questioning him. As a member of a pure blood family, wealth and knowledge are passed down through bloodlines, so he naturally knows more. But he had never heard of any potion with such effects, otherwise, his family would have obtained some and consumed it by now. Li Hong turned to look at him and said indifferently, "Perhaps no one has researched it yet, but you can wait a few days, I can show you." Malfoy's questioning was exactly what he wanted, serving as a preemptive promotion, and he spoke up on the topic. "All right, I'm not your teacher. If you have questions, you can ask your professors." Having achieved his purpose, Li Hong naturally did not want to continue answering endlessly. With these little wizards' curiosity, they could probably talk until tomorrow without stopping, so he interrupted. He then turned and walked towards the teacher's table. "Will you be our professor?" Fred seized the opportunity to ask one last question, which was also the one everyone was most looking forward to. After witnessing Li Hong's spells, they naturally hoped he would become their professor. "No," Li Hong replied without turning back. In an instant, all the young wizards in the hall revealed looks of disappointment. Even someone as proud as Malfoy questioned the situation. He wasn't foolish, he certainly wanted to learn the level of magic that Li Hong demonstrated. Li Hong arrived relatively early, and at the professor's table, he was the only one dining. Around halfway through his meal, an adult wizard walked in. He had fine, soft hair closely cropped to his scalp and a small mustache on his lips. This was Professor Lupin, the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. He hurried over to the professor's table, exchanged a brief greeting with Li Hong, and then sat down to eat. Li Hong glanced at Lupin and immediately sensed something was off. He then turned his gaze away and continued eating, casually reflecting. He remembered that Professor Lupin was a werewolf. Once transformed, he would lose his rationality and bite indiscriminately. Those bitten would also become werewolves. It was evident now, and he understood the reason. It could be categorized as both a poison and a curse. Like a magical power, he possessed a unique magic within him, residing in his blood. This magic was inherently similar to a wizard's magic, but carried a hint of malevolence. During a full moon, this magic would go haywire, forcibly triggering transformation. It could be considered a certain type of magic with special properties. As Li Hong ate, he pondered. This magic was not innate but was brought from the outside and could not merge with his own magical power, so it could be regarded as a curse. However, if one could tame this special magic and integrate it with their own, it would be a method to enhance one's magical power, almost doubling it. Moreover, this type of magic, with its unique attributes, would certainly be more desirable compared to ordinary magical power. Once merged with his own magic, he could even transform the existing magic into one with the same properties, thereby gaining the ability to transform at will into a werewolf. Furthermore, the transformed werewolf could be seen as a magical creature, not a typical werewolf. It could be considered an alternative animagus transformation technique, even breaking the limitation of not being able to transform into magical creatures. The fact that such a good method had gone unnoticed was truly a waste. Upon this thought, Li Hong couldn't help but shake his head. This method wasn't difficult at all. If a wizard put in the effort to study it, they might just discover it. Unfortunately, until he finished his meal, he still hadn't seen Snape's figure. He wondered if Snape was still asleep. Li Hong didn't rush, and after a while, he got up and returned to the staff lounge. In the blink of an eye, the next morning arrived. Sitting on a cushion that had taken the shape of a pillow, Li Hong slowly opened his eyes. A night had passed, and his cultivation level had completely synchronized. At this moment, a golden core lay quietly in his dantian, surrounded by wisps of true qi that had condensed into mist. Today was Saturday, and the professors did not need to teach. After leaving the staff lounge, Li Hong made his way to Snape's office door, which was tightly closed, suggesting that no one was inside. He knocked lightly on the door, and after a moment, there was a click, and the door opened to reveal a sullen face. The moment Snape saw Li Hong, his expression darkened instantaneously, and without thinking, he started to close the door again. He knew that he would never be able to defeat Li Hong. He realized this the moment he had personally suffered from one of Li Hong's spells. So, he didn't even pull out his wand to seek revenge. However, as he exerted force to shut the door, he found that it didn't move at all, as if there was immense resistance blocking him. He looked down and saw nothing obstructing the doorway, yet the door wouldn't budge. Without needing to think, he knew this was Li Hong's doing. His face turned sour as if he had eaten something unpleasant. Taking a deep breath to calm his anger, he coldly asked, "What do you want?" "I want to take a look at your potion ingredient stock," Li Hong replied straightforwardly. "On what grounds?" Snape furrowed his brow and retorted without hesitation. "Our Taoists have a method to summon the dead," Li Hong said softly, considering it one of his signature skills. Since ghosts existed in this world, naturally, there was also an underworld. Li Hong's words directly plunged Snape into silence, his eyes dark with unspoken thoughts. He didn't know if Li Hong was playing tricks on him, but he felt the other party was mysterious and strange. Perhaps he really did have such abilities. Ultimately, he gave Li Hong a fierce glare, like a coiled snake that might strike at any moment, as if warning him that if he were deceived, he would make him pay, even if he couldn't win. Li Hong remained calm, unaffected by Snape's threat, and saw no danger in him. After all, this world was not something that could be dictated solely by looks. In the next moment, Snape stepped aside to make way, and although he said nothing, it was already clear without words. Li Hong immediately entered the office, which was as cold and dim as Snape's expression, like the lair of a venomous snake. It wasn't that there were no windows, but rather that they were blocked by thick curtains, allowing only a sliver of daylight to creep in. In the center of the office was a long table, cluttered with various bottles and jars, where potions were being brewed. A crucible contained boiling liquid, emitting a strange odor. As soon as Li Hong walked in, Snape slammed the door shut, seemingly sealing off any chance of escape. The room became even dimmer. Snape then walked in front of Li Hong, coldly staring at him, saying nothing and making no other movements. Li Hong quickly understood that Snape wanted him to summon the undead first. "I will do as you wish once I finish." After a moment of silence, Snape chose to compromise, turning to the two cabinets in the corner, each the size of a wardrobe. He pulled out his wand and tapped the cabinet, causing the door to spring open with a creak. Once the cabinet was fully opened, its true contents were revealed, 5 shelves packed tightly with various bottles and jars. Some jars contained fresh-looking plants, some held unidentified liquids, and some contained the remains of certain animals. Li Hong used his mental perception to scan through the contents, more meticulously than with his eyes, analyzing the properties of each ingredient. The elixir he wanted to concoct was a potion for purifying bloodlines. It was of little use to him, but it held significant meaning for wizards, beings born with magical power. For wizards, their bloodline was equivalent to their strength. As long as they could make their blood more pure, their magical power would be enhanced. It must be said that Snape's collection was complete and diverse. After identifying the medicinal properties, Li Hong already had a clear understanding and had already formulated a recipe in his mind. "What is this?" Li Hong then began to inquire about the names of the materials to refine the recipe. In addition, he asked about the rarity of these materials. Snape wore an expression of impatience but still coldly replied, showing no interest in Li Hong's inquiries about what these potions were for. Li Hong also modified the recipe according to Snape's descriptions. If the rarity or difficulty of obtaining a material was too great, he would unhesitatingly discard it and use materials with similar properties instead. After more than 10 minutes, he finally came up with a formula. Snape's impatience was already evident on his face, as if he was afraid Li Hong wouldn't notice it. "It's done," Li Hong said simply. In the next moment, Snape waved his sleeve, magic surged, and the cabinet door slammed shut, seemingly expressing his dissatisfaction. Li Hong remained indifferent, walking over to a desk in the corner of the office that barely had enough space to write. He reached into his bag and pulled out a pile of items. Yellow paper, a porcelain plate, cinnabar, and a brush. Under Snape's scrutinizing gaze, Li Hong dipped the brush into the cinnabar and began to draw intricate symbols on the yellow paper. In less than a second, he lifted the brush, and it was clear that the talisman was already covered with very complex runes. Snape frowned as he looked at the yellow paper, genuinely unsure of what it was. Could such a strange thing really summon the dead? However, Li Hong did not put down his brush immediately. Instead, he turned the freshly drawn talisman over to reveal a blank page on the back. "The name of the spirit?" Li Hong casually asked, raising his brush and ready to write. Snape furrowed his brow but did not question it. Instead, he cooperatively replied. "Lily Evans, Potter." At this moment, Snape forgot to breathe. His heart tightened, and his cold gaze held a hint of complex emotion as he slowly uttered Lily's name. Li Hong immediately wrote it down, naturally writing in English. "Time of death?" Li Hong continued to ask. October 31st, 1981. Snape's expression darkened slightly, his eyes losing some anger as he spoke slowly. This date was something he would never forget. Li Hong continued to write the date on the back and then put down his pen. He returned everything else into the divination bag. Only then did he pick up the yellow paper, and Snape's gaze followed the paper's movement. "Then what? Is it just here?" Li Hong looked at Snape and asked. "Wait a moment." Snape's expression changed, and he hurried into the inner room of the office, coming out again after a while. Li Hong watched Snape, who he thought would wash his hair, but he didn't. He looked like he had tidied up a bit, though it was hard to tell where. Li Hong didn't waste time talking. He caught Snape's glance, his expression immediately tightening, as he pinched the talisman paper in his hand and executed a spell seal. In the next moment, flames ignited on the talisman paper, and Li Hong immediately relaxed his grip, causing the paper to fall downward, having already burned completely before it touched the ground, leaving behind obvious ash. Snape watched this coldly, but next, Li Hong didn't make any other moves, yet there were no changes here either. After waiting for a while, he was about to question Li Hong when he noticed the ash on the ground started to shift as if a breeze had come. The ash scattered and began to spin rapidly in the gentle wind. Snape's expression changed slightly. All the doors and windows here were tightly shut, how could there be wind? The ash swirled faster and faster, with increasing force, and what had been a small amount of ash actually began to form a small tornado composed entirely of ash. Suddenly, the ash exploded outward, scattering chaotically in the air and slowly settling down. Snape felt a bit anxious, thinking that Lily was about to appear. However, Li Hong couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, a trace of surprise flashing in his eyes, though he quickly regained his composure. "Where is she?" Not seeing the desired apparition for a long time, Snape looked at Li Hong and questioned him. "Failed. She refuses to see you," Li Hong said calmly, which immediately darkened Snape's complexion, wide-eyed, suspecting that Li Hong had deceived him. "Are you toying with me?" Snape became agitated all at once. He shouldn't have been foolish enough to believe the other party. He even thought about taking out his wand on the spot to give Li Hong a fierce curse, gripping the wand hidden in his robe. Li Hong looked at Snape with a calm expression, waiting for the other to take out his wand, so that he would no longer have to keep his promise. In the end, Snape did loosen his grip on his wand. He understood the meaning in Li Hong's eyes and therefore did not dare to act. He could know full well of Li Hong's power and still act recklessly in the face of death, even if it brought no real benefit. But he couldn't afford to lose this only chance to see Lily. "She knows you wanted to see her, which is why she didn't come." Li Hong directly pierced through the veil, exposing a fact that was somewhat cruel for Snape. Indeed, this statement struck Snape's heart like a knife. His pupils quivered involuntarily, his complexion changed subtly, and a flicker of pain and guilt emerged in his eyes. The hand hidden in his sleeve tightened its grip, nails digging painfully into his palm. "She won't forgive me," Snape murmured. Li Hong looked at Snape's demeanor without any sympathy. After all, if she didn't want to see him, there must be a reason. Life and death take precedence, so it wasn't the other party's problem, it was Snape's problem. One should ask what exactly Snape had done to cause a soul to refuse even such a rare chance to return to the world of the living. Of course, Li Hong had some understanding, knowing that Snape had committed great wrongs, and at this moment could only say he deserved it. However, a promise is a promise, and the conditions Li Hong stated would naturally be honored. In fact, he could forcibly open a passage to the underworld and bring Lily out. Of course, he wouldn't do such a thing, after all, the dead come first. During Snape's moment of distraction, Li Hong quickly drew the same sigil again, writing Lily Potter's name and the time of death behind it. She may not want to see you, but that doesn't mean she won't want to see others. You still have one more chance, cherish it. Li Hong directly prompted him. When Snape heard this, he disregarded his sorrow and suddenly came to a realization. Right, Harry. If it's Harry, she would definitely come. Snape's expression changed, as if he had grasped a lifeline, and he exclaimed loudly. I'll go find him. Without waiting for Li Hong's consent, he quickly dashed out the door. Li Hong didn't mind waiting for a while. After more than 10 minutes, Snape finally returned, dragging a reluctant Harry who was struggling, followed by Hermione and Ron. You can't do this. I'm going to tell Professor McGonagall. Hermione couldn't stop Snape, nor could she physically confront him. She could only threaten him with her words, but Snape wasn't interested in any of that as he pulled Harry inside with a cold expression. In fact, they knew nothing at all. After being approached by Snape, they had been forcibly required to follow him without any explanation. Once Snape brought Harry in, he let go of him abruptly. Upon seeing Li Hong, Harry and the others' eyes lit up. Mr. Li, they instantly forgot that they had been brought against their will, excitedly calling out to Li Hong while also feeling a bit puzzled. After all, Snape had been blasted against the wall by Li Hong's spell the day before, so how was he here with them today? Li Hong nodded in response and then turned his gaze to Snape. You two can go outside. Potter stays, Snape said coldly. Hermione and Ron hesitated for a moment, but ultimately, due to Snape's authority, they had to leave the office. Once the door closed, Snape eagerly turned his attention to Li Hong, seemingly urging him to begin immediately. Li Hong couldn't help but shake his head. No wonder Lily Potter didn't want to see Snape. To pull a mother's spirit from the afterlife and not offer any explanation at all, it really showed how he regarded the other person as merely a tool. However, this was a matter between Snape and Harry, and he had no intention of getting involved. Once someone arrived, Harry would naturally understand. He immediately began to chant the incantation and make the necessary gestures to summon the deceased. The ashes quickly began to swirl this time, gradually expanding to a height of 1 person. Suddenly, the ashes stopped moving, the motion coming to an abrupt halt, and all the ashes fell rapidly to the ground, not drifting down normally. Harry looked at the scene before him in confusion, while Snape wore a tense expression. As the ashes all landed, a semi-transparent figure slowly emerged, dressed in an elegant long gown, with deep red hair cascading to her chest, looking young with a pair of loving eyes. The person who came was Lily Potter, still maintaining the appearance of someone who has passed away, which made her look very young. When Snape saw this scene, his gaze locked onto her, his body involuntarily trembled, and his lips moved slightly, as though he had 1,000 words to say, yet in the end, not a single sound escaped him. As for Harry Potter, he was already in a daze, having been forced here without being told what was happening. Then, after seeing Li Hong's strange actions, a transparent ghost appeared. He was slightly stunned at first, only finding the ghost beautiful and a bit familiar, with a sense of warmth. But the next moment, his expression changed, and he looked at the ghost in disbelief, standing there in a daze. Harry, my child. It was only when Lily called out with gentle and loving eyes that Harry snapped back to reality. Mother, is it really you? Harry said hesitantly. It's me. Lily quickly flew over and hugged Harry. Of course, Harry couldn't feel any physical sensation, after all, she was a ghost. How are you here? I summoned you. Li Hong stood up immediately, knowing he couldn't rely on Snape, who hadn't said a word until now, to explain things to Harry. Spirits have a time limit in the living world, so cherish the time. Li Hong casually pointed at Lily's translucent form, granting her a surge of magical power. Otherwise, just relying on the incantation would only sustain her for a little over 10 minutes. He didn't say much after that, walking towards the door, pulling open the office door. Two figures were blocking the entrance, straining to listen, nearly knocked over by the sudden opening of the door. These two were Hermione and Ron, who were worried about Harry and had been eavesdropping outside. When they saw the door open, they couldn't help but peek inside, and there was Harry embracing a ghost, showing a hint of shock on his face. They had vaguely overheard the sounds from inside and understood what was happening. But this is unscientific. No, it's not magic. Hermione's eyes widened. She had been at Hogwarts for over 2 years, having read countless magic books, and she knew that bringing the soul of a deceased person back was utterly unheard of. However, they soon saw Li Hong standing calmly in front of them, and instantly realized what to do. Hermione pulled Ron, who was still in a daze, out of the way, giving Li Hong passage. Li Hong then walked out and headed down the corridor. Seeing this, Hermione directly pulled the office door back shut and didn't go inside. She knew that what Harry needed now was solitude. Immediately looking towards Li Hong's silhouette, she pulled Ron and chased after him, wanting to clarify how this was done, otherwise, she wouldn't be able to sleep all night. Go. As they really began to chase Li Hong, they quickly realized the rumors were true. Currently, there was a rumor at Hogwarts that one should never expect to catch up to the new arrival, Li Hong. Some had tried to approach Li Hong, but when they saw his figure and tried to catch up, they discovered that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't keep up. The distance seemed close, but even with all their might, they still couldn't catch up to the leisurely walking Li Hong. This had become a legend within the school. Even though many didn't believe it, quite a few had come out to confirm that the rumor was indeed true. Eventually, some even began to discuss how to catch up to Li Hong, with some suggesting the use of flying broomsticks, while others proposed using petrification spells. Of course, this suggestion was met with disdain from others. While it was not impossible, they had witnessed Li Hong's magical prowess firsthand and wondered who would dare attempt such a thing. At this moment, Hermione and Ron realized the rumors were indeed real. They truly couldn't catch up. I can't run anymore, Ron panted, leaning against the wall and waving his hand. Hermione was in the same boat. Seeing Li Hong already walking out of the castle, she was ready to give up. But after gritting her teeth, she refused to lose hope and continued to pull the useless Ron to chase after him. They had chased out of the castle and into the open, but after running for some distance, Ron could barely speak, and Hermione had reached her limits. Just as they were about to give up, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Whoa, look, he stopped. Hermione exclaimed in surprise, noticing that Li Hong had come to a halt, looking in a certain direction. She immediately continued pulling Ron to chase him. At that moment, Li Hong slightly glanced back at the pursuing Hermione and Ron, then withdrew his gaze. He was well aware that someone was trailing behind him. That was why they couldn't keep up. Now that he had stopped, it wasn't to wait for them. Li Hong's gaze then fell upon a large tree 10 meters away, where a shadow flitted past. Although he had only caught a glimpse, it was enough to see that it was a figure wearing a black robe, the majority of its body shrouded beneath the cloak, and the only visible part, a face, was shrouded in black mist, subtly swirling, clearly intended to conceal itself. However, how could such concealment obstruct Li Hong's eyes? He saw that behind the black mist was a human head, which was nothing but a skeleton. Please wait a moment. Hermione and Ron finally caught up and called out to Li Hong. Li Hong, however, did not respond, calmly gazing in a certain direction. The man in the black robe did not leave. He was watching from the shadows. How could he possibly conceal himself from his spiritual awareness? However, the other's strength did surprise him. It was quite formidable. Of course, this is compared to a wizard, but even compared to the strongest Dumbledore, it is still very strong. In this world, he had already reached a somewhat supermodel level. Li Hong made a slight judgment in his heart. If compared to cultivators, he should be at the Golden Core level. Dumbledore, in terms of strength, was likely at the Foundation Establishment level. This is enough to illustrate the issue. One must realize that there is only one realm difference between Foundation Establishment and Golden Core, but the difference in strength is like heaven and earth. Those at the Foundation Establishment level are practically no match for those at the Golden Core level, which sufficiently demonstrates the power of the man in the black robe just now, of course, excluding Li Hong. Mr. Li, I am Hermione from Gryffindor. May I ask how you did that? The books I have read do not mention any magic that can summon the souls of the deceased. Hermione finally caught up, breathing heavily as she asked. I didn't use magic. Li Hong simply replied. Not magic. Are there other forces in this world that are as wondrous as magic? Hermione exclaimed, a flicker of shock passing through her eyes as she pressed on with her questions. Chapter 51. Yes, Li Hong casually replied, most of his attention focused on the figure in the black robe. His strength and magic were similar but not the same. At the same time, this being was not really alive, exuding a heavy aura of death. It was likely attracted here because of the necromancy he summoned. The other party had not attacked him, so he would not have cared, but the key was that the person was lurking in the shadows observing him, as if Li Hong couldn't see him, which was somewhat annoying. From his perspective, a non-human entity lurking ominously in the corner watching him was hard to bear. Come out, Li Hong said softly, his voice resonating like a thunderclap. Though he did not raise his voice, everyone nearby could hear him, as if he had cast an amplification spell. Hermione's constant curiosity was interrupted, and she looked around, but did not see anyone else. The black-robed figure moved slightly, clearly having heard him, but aside from that, there were no other movements, perhaps thinking Li Hong was not speaking to him. Li Hong slightly turned his head, his gaze falling into the distance, behind a large tree far away. In the next moment, the black-robed figure hiding behind the tree visibly began to fade, and in the blink of an eye vanished. Are you talking to someone? Hermione blinked and asked. There's no one else here. Ron quickly turned to check his surroundings, but the area was empty, with no hiding places apart from this tree. Li Hong turned his body, looking back, the black-robed figure had not left but had simply moved to another spot. Hermione and Ron immediately followed Li Hong's gaze but still saw nothing. Li Hong's actions also made the black-robed figure realize that he was indeed exposed, thus decided not to remain hidden. In the next moment, before them, a shadow quickly coalesced, eventually transforming into a black-robed figure just 5 or 6 meters away from them. Hermione and Ron were startled and quickly stepped back. What is this? Ron asked in shock, but no one answered him. In Li Hong's eyes, there was not a hint of disturbance as he calmly observed the other party, already having an answer in mind. He had somewhat misjudged the strength of the other party. The special magical power on the other person indeed reached the golden core level, but beside them was also enveloped by an invisible force, which was hard to detect without close examination. Rules. This is a power that can only be mastered by achieving an extremely high level of enlightenment, and can be called the rules of the world. In Li Hong's prediction, if it were a cultivator, they would probably have to be above the transformation stage to initially come into contact with it. Being able to slightly utilize the power of the rules probably means they are not far from becoming an immortal. Of course, there are exceptions, mainly depending on one's comprehension. This kind of enlightenment, once the cultivation level reaches a threshold, will naturally come into contact with. However, if one has exceptionally high comprehension, they can also master it in advance before reaching the requisite cultivation level. Nevertheless, the person in front of him did not fall into either of these categories. The other party had not mastered the rules, but had been endowed with them. Grim Reaper, Hermione suddenly exclaimed, recognizing a figure she had seen in a travel journal. At that time, Hermione hadn't taken it seriously because that travel journal belonged to the casual conversation genre. It was uncertain whether the other contents within were fabricated, not to mention the records about the Grim Reaper. Why are you following me? Li Hong asked softly. The other party should be a ruler of the underworld, which could be considered a form of divinity in any world, so being endowed with the power of the rules was not surprising. However, while the power of the rules sounded intimidating, it also depended on the world at hand. At least from Li Hong's perspective, this world itself was relatively weak. The Great Tao was simple and clear, and also quite fragile, so the so-called power of the rules probably wouldn't be too strong. But for ordinary wizards, it should still be regarded as the ceiling. You have violated the rules of the underworld by bringing the souls away from the other shore. Such a crime is unforgivable. I am here to take your soul. The voice of the figure in the black robe was somber, sounding devoid of any emotional fluctuation. This directly startled Hermione and Ron, who looked at Li Hong in a panic. Yet Li Hong remained unperturbed, curious as he asked, "How do you plan to take it away?" The figure in the black robe immediately raised both hands, the sleeves falling away to reveal bony arms. As the palms came together and slowly pulled apart, something emerged from the gaps between their hands. A pitch-black, smooth iron rod, followed by the gradual appearance of its two side parts. Suddenly, it revealed a scythe, entirely black except for the silver blade, which emitted a hint of chill. It looked exceedingly sharp, likely quite effective for reaping. It is meant for use against humans. Just by aligning the blade with the neck and pulling gently, you can ensure that their head separates from the body. As long as you sever your head, your soul will naturally be collected. The Grim Reaper said ominously, holding a scythe and striking it against the ground. At that moment, the tree beside Li Hong underwent a change. Its branches and limbs became soft, darting toward Li Hong like venomous snakes. Be careful. Hermione noticed something unusual, looked up, and hurriedly warned him. However, Li Hong didn't even glance. The peach wood sword inside the scabbard behind him suddenly sprang out, spinning slightly in the air, emanating a sharp sword light, before falling back into the scabbard. In the next moment, pieces of wooden branches and vines fell and scattered on the ground. The black mist on the Grim Reaper's face began to swirl. It was the reason he hadn't approached Li Hong directly and instead was peering in the shadows. The techniques displayed by Li Hong were not typical magic. His method of directly pulling someone from the underworld was even more unheard of, which is why he thought to ascertain the other's capabilities before taking action. But such methods were still not sufficient. The Grim Reaper continued to tap on the ground. Instantly, the scattered pebbles on the ground erupted in billowing black mist, suddenly transforming into over a dozen pitch-black evil wolves, shaking their heads as if adapting to their new existence, their eyes blood-red, with gaping maws exposing sharp fangs as they lunged at Li Hong. Yet that wasn't all. The large tree beside Li Hong quivered, and numerous leaves fell like severed hair. Immediately after, the tree uprooted itself, using its thick roots as feet while its branches intertwined and bundled together, forming hands. Ron and Hermione stared wide-eyed, unable to believe their eyes. Was this still the world they knew? Even Dumbledore wouldn't be able to achieve such things, right? Ron wanted to run away, immediately backing away, but he stumbled and fell, revealing a face full of despair. His legs went weak. Hermione was also shocked, but much better off than Ron. She quickly pulled him up, but instead of fleeing, she hid behind Li Hong. She noticed that Li Hong's demeanor was too composed. It seemed he wasn't taking these miraculous spectacles seriously, and rather than run away blindly, it might be better to take a gamble. Li Hong watched the scene before him with great interest. It was indeed as he had anticipated. The power of the Grim Reaper had not escaped the realm of magic. What was happening now was merely a form of transmutation. But it was far more advanced than mere transmutation. Li Hong could discern that these evil wolves possessed a genuine life force. Moreover, they were not ordinary wild wolves but magical creatures, something that all the transmutations described in books could not achieve. Li Hong reached into his bag of talismans and directly took out a yellow talisman. The talisman instantly left his fingers and flew towards the enormous treeman. Upon seeing this, the treeman attempted to swat at the yellow talisman, but at that moment, the talisman emitted golden light, illuminating the treeman and causing its movements to momentarily halt. In that brief instant, the talisman had already approached and was stuck directly onto the coarse bark. The sealing talisman suddenly took effect, and the treeman's body became rigid, completely unable to move. After throwing the talisman, Li Hong no longer cared about the treeman beside him and casually took out a wand. He pointed it at the more than 10 evil wolves that were lunging at him. A gale erupted. In the next moment, the wand in Li Hong's hand transformed as if it were the barrel of a Gatling gun, emitting a blue glow as magical beams surged forth in waves. Listening to the cries of anguish, all the evil wolves were not spared in the face of the dense magical light, and they were all flung backward, turning into stone chips as black mist rose from their fallen forms. Despite the seemingly massive spectacle, Li Hong handled it effortlessly. Ron and Hermione gasped, their mouths agape, feeling a surge of excitement, as if they were the ones dealing with the Grim Reaper themselves. The Grim Reaper snorted coldly at this sight and suddenly vanished like mist. Be careful. Hermione and Ron's eyes widened in shock, revealing a hint of horror, as they saw the Grim Reaper appear behind Li Hong, its scythe descending sharply towards his neck. However, Li Hong did not need reminding. His consciousness had long enveloped the vicinity, and he had already sensed the Grim Reaper's landing point before it appeared. This kind of teleportation was somewhat similar to shape-shifting, but far more advanced. As the scythe swung down, Li Hong felt numerous traces of magic, or rather, it had already risen to the level of laws. His body became rigid, enveloped by the power of the laws, which was many times stronger than the petrification by a basilisk. Those enveloped by this law were completely immobilized, only able to obediently present their necks to be slaughtered. Even Dumbledore, if present, would have been restricted by this law, let alone shifting shapes, he wouldn't even be able to move a finger. This is the absolute power of the laws. No matter in what world one masters the power of the laws, they shall be comparable to the divine. At this moment, the Grim Reaper felt nothing but indifference. Although his opponent's methods were somewhat perplexing, they were ultimately going to die under his scythe. After all, he was a god, elevated and untouchable. Dealing with wizards was as simple as crushing an ant underfoot. So there was nothing to feel proud about. However, at that moment, a scene that astonished him unfolded. Li Hong turned around, his expression calm and tranquil, as he lightly raised a finger. His magical power coalesced at the tip of his finger, meeting the rapidly descending blade tip. In the next instant, this scythe that could reap the lives of countless beings was easily blocked. It was as if an adult were to block a helpless punch from a baby. The black mist on the Grim Reaper's face churned, and his heart was filled with shock. How could this person move? And how did he manage to block his Grim Reaper's scythe? It's important to note that his scythe was unstoppable. Even the scales of a fire dragon's armor would be easily cut through, let alone a mere finger. So that's how it is. Li Hong suddenly spoke, a hint of interest flashing through his eyes. It turned out that this power of the laws did not belong to the Grim Reaper but to the scythe. He immediately reached out to grasp the dark blade of the scythe. Upon seeing this, the Grim Reaper was startled and tried to retract the hand that was gripping the scythe, only to be horrified to find he could not move, as if struck by a petrifying curse. But this was not magic, it was Li Hong's cultivation. With the aura of the golden core released, his 9-patterned golden core began to spin, directly suppressing the Grim Reaper. Ordinary golden cores might not achieve this, but Li Hong's golden core was different. What appeared to be a calm scene was actually the result of his 9-patterned golden core clashing with the fragile power of the laws of this world. There was no way around it. The laws of this world were too weak, far inferior to the world where Iron Man resided. Even a mere Yuanying practitioner could easily suppress this so-called divine being. Though Li Hong was only at the golden core stage, his foundation was different. Without considering spells and other overwhelming methods that could easily suppress Yuanying practitioners, relying solely on his 9-patterned golden core allowed him to withstand a Yuanying practitioner without falling behind. At this moment, suppressing this slight power of the laws of the world was naturally a piece of cake. After all, this was just a power of laws, not the whole world. Under the horrified and fearful gaze of the Grim Reaper, Li Hong's hand drew closer to the scythe's handle. His heart was storming, trying to regain control over his body. However, in Li Hong's eyes, he was completely motionless, unable even to make a tremor of a finger. The Grim Reaper's scythe was directly taken by Li Hong, and in the next moment, an unexpected change occurred. The black robe on the Grim Reaper violently transformed into mist and dissipated, revealing a skeleton. This caused Ron to shout in surprise. As for Hermione, although she was also greatly shocked and felt a trace of fear in her heart, she managed to hold her ground, staring fixedly at the skeleton, as if thinking that blinking even once would cause the deepest secrets of this world to slip through her fingers. However, this white skeleton is not a true entity. One could see the white bones giving birth to flesh, ultimately transforming into a bald old man clad in a luxurious black robe, resembling a noble. He exuded an impressive aura, with a long white beard and piercing eyes like an eagle's, his features sharp and hooked, resembling some kind of evil sorcerer at first glance. Just from his appearance, one could tell he was certainly some sort of dark wizard. However, this figure was still not a tangible being, it was semi-transparent, like a ghost. At this moment, he displayed an expression of disbelief, looking at Li Hong with eyes full of apprehension. Yet even in his ghostly form, he remained motionless under Li Hong's imposing presence. The Grim Reaper actually looks like this. Hermione boldly stepped closer, as if she were using her eyes to record this important historical fact. Perhaps later she would write a book capturing this visage, showing the world that this is the true appearance of the Grim Reaper, which is not much different from a dark wizard, though one wonders how many people would believe it. Hermione, Ron called out urgently, but he didn't dare to approach, unable to comprehend how Hermione had the courage to get close to someone so formidable. This was the Grim Reaper. It's okay. Hermione's face no longer looked flustered. She had realized that the situation was still under Li Hong's control. After all, even the Grim Reaper's scythe had been taken by Li Hong. Was there really a need to say more about the outcome? Li Hong grasped the scythe, looking at the bald ghost who, at this moment, was not much different from an ordinary ghost and posed no threat whatsoever. The reason he had powers comparable to a deity was due to the strength of this scythe. This scythe was like the throne of a god, anyone who sat upon it could become divine. However, in Li Hong's hands, it was remarkably calm, as if it had lost all its power. Li Hong's gaze fell on the scythe in his hand. This scythe contained the power of the laws, perhaps born from the local Great Tao, intended to choose a Grim Reaper to govern the underworld. However, Li Hong was not a local, and had not gained the Great Tao's recognition, so he could not use this power. But Li Hong did not care much. Although this scythe could barely be considered a treasure, once removed from this world, it would become nothing more than an ordinary scythe, likely rusting even if used to cut grass. It was similar to the infinite gems from another world. Of course, Li Hong could forcibly suppress the power of the laws within the scythe for his own use, usurping the local Great Tao's authority, but there was simply no need, it wasn't anything good. Li Hong then looked at the ghost and released his suppression over it. The ghost had just regained its freedom, and its expression changed instantly as it tried to snatch the scythe from Li Hong's hand. Without the scythe, it was just an ordinary soul, not a Grim Reaper. Seeing this, Li Hong did not obstruct it, letting its hand reach for the handle of the scythe. However, the ghost's hand grasped nothing but air, its expression shifting as it waved its hand repeatedly, yet it could not touch the scythe's physical form at all. Why? The ghost could not help but speak, its voice sounding somewhat deep and resonant, as if this were its true voice. Because it's in my hand. Li Hong explained lightly. How could something in his possession act so recklessly? Who exactly are you? The bald ghost looked at Li Hong with a face full of trepidation, asking. Why not tell me about your origins? Perhaps I will return it to you. Li Hong did not answer but instead responded, not lying. This item was useless to him, so what if he returned it to the other party? As for the other party's attack on him, Li Hong could also understand. After all, he was the one who broke the rules first. The talismans Li Hong used were essentially a kind of pass for crossing. For Taoists, the reason they could summon the deceased was that agreements had been made with the ancestors, thus opening the doors wide for convenience. With the power to issue passes, recording names and other information to offer below, the deceased would have the pass, allowing them to legally leave the underworld. This was the normal situation. Of course, Li Hong modified the runes so that the talismans could forcefully carry the souls beneath through the barriers, which, to some extent, was akin to breaking out of prison to save someone. However, breaking the rules meant breaking the rules. If this Grim Reaper in front of him could take him away, he naturally had no objections. The unfortunate thing was that the other party was of no use at all. The bald ghost, upon hearing Li Hong's words, changed expressions, realizing that he was now like a fish on the chopping board, completely at the mercy of others, with no choice in the matter. Let alone the fact that he was being forcibly suppressed in the state of a Grim Reaper. What more, he was now just a wraith with little power, unable to cast even the simplest spells. My name is Salazar Slytherin, the 17th Grim Reaper of the underworld. Ultimately, the bald wraith could only cooperate and say in a deep voice. Hermione and Ron were eavesdropping nearby, feeling that the name was somewhat familiar. The next moment, they exchanged shocked glances and blurted out. Slytherin, you are the Slytherin founder from Hogwarts. Ron asked with a face full of astonishment. Even though he wasn't good at the history of magic, he knew this was a figure from 1,000 years ago. Salazar nodded with a complex expression and turned to look at the Hogwarts castle that was so close, his eyes filled with a hint of nostalgia. Then Salazar continued to recount his experiences. Of course, he had thought of surviving when he was alive, but in the end, he still died. After dying, he fell into the underworld and encountered the Grim Reaper of that time. The Grim Reaper chose him, handed him the Grim Reaper's scythe, allowing him to inherit the identity of the Grim Reaper, and thus he became the Grim Reaper, continuing until now. Ron and Hermione were astonished. This was probably one of the most secretive secrets in the magical world, likely known only to them present. What about the previous Grim Reaper? Ron asked curiously. He left. Salazar answered succinctly. Where did he go? Ron pressed on. However, Salazar shook his head. Cannot say. Matters of the underworld cannot be told to the living. Salazar originally didn't want to answer, but with Li Hong looking at him, he could only say this. The matter of the Grim Reaper's scythe was not considered a secret of the underworld, but the rest of the things were true secrets. One of his previous responsibilities was to deal with those who had leaked secrets through various means, including ghosts. Li Hong could probably guess as much. It was nothing but matters of reincarnation. "I've finished speaking." Salazar then looked at Li Hong, his vulture-like gaze clearly different from Snape's. Snape's eyes held the coldness and ruthlessness of a serpent hunting its prey. But Salazar was different. His gaze was equally icy but carried an air of arrogance, a kind of condescension. "You may, but with conditions," Li Hong said flatly. "I need someone to carry out tasks for me. You will work for me for 5 years." 5 years was enough time for him to gather sufficient magical materials for alchemy, and besides, he believed that in 5 years, the magical plants here would be of no use to him. Salazar's brows immediately furrowed, but he remained silent. 5 years wasn't long, but why should he? He was the Dark Lord, not some domesticated house elf. However, at the moment, he had no leverage to negotiate, leaving him with no choice but to agree. "Fine," Salazar said in a deep voice. Upon hearing this, Li Hong immediately handed the scythe of death to Salazar. "Wait, Mr. Li, aren't you afraid he will go back on his word?" Ron suddenly shouted, curious, but was met with Salazar's murderous glare, causing his neck to shrink as he fell silent. In fact, Salazar was thinking the same thing. "I'm not afraid," Li Hong casually remarked, his hands still moving, while Salazar received the scythe, finally able to touch the scythe of death, a flicker of joy passing through his eyes. The moment Salazar took the scythe of death, his body was enveloped in a black cloak, even his face was shrouded by a layer of black mist. He had regained the power of the Dark Lord. The next second, without any warning, Salazar transformed into a wisp of black mist and vanished from his spot. He ran away. Ron hurriedly pointed at the spot where Salazar had just been standing. In the blink of an eye, Salazar had returned to the underworld using the power of the Scythe of Death. "Nothing to worry about," Li Hong said softly, raising his hand. In the next moment, black mist surged forth, transforming into a scythe, which was evidently the same Scythe of Death from before. Having passed through his hands, the Scythe of Death was far more than just a simple Scythe of Death. He was directly recalled by him. At this moment, Salazar in the underworld was completely taken aback, his body transforming back into a ghost. "Where is my scythe?" His furious voice echoed through the empty corners of the underworld. Ron's eyes lit up as he stared fixedly at the death scythe in Li Hong's hands, desire written all over his face. He couldn't help but imagine that if he could possess such a weapon, he wouldn't even have to go to school anymore, it would be worth as much as Dumbledore in an instant. "Can I touch it?" Ron leaned in closer to Li Hong, eyes wide in anticipation. "You can borrow it to play with." Li Hong casually tossed the scythe into the air, and Ron caught it in a fluster. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he carefully ran his fingers along the handle, but then he looked down at himself in confusion, as if nothing had changed. "Hermione, can you check if I look like the Grim Reaper now?" "No," Hermione replied with a serious expression. Ron couldn't help but twist the scythe in his hands, his cheeks reddening with eagerness, yet no change occurred. "Stop thinking about it, it's meant for the dead," Li Hong remarked upon seeing him, explaining that to wield this scythe, one first needs to be a local and secondly, to become a spirit. In the hands of the living, it serves no purpose. "Oh, I see," Ron mumbled regretfully, still fixated on the scythe. Seeing this, Li Hong took back the scythe, somewhat worried that this kid might be tempted to take his own life for the sake of the death's powers. He then shook the scythe in his hand, and in the next moment, the scythe rapidly shrank down, finally leaving only a toothpick-sized version. "What's going on?" Ron asked in astonishment. "Size reduction spell," Li Hong replied casually. The scythe's rule-based power was indeed interesting, it derived from magic. Using the scythe to cast spells would unleash its rule-based strength, including the transformation spell Salazar had used before. Under the power of the rules, it allowed magic to reach levels unattainable by ordinary wizards. However, what Li Hong was using now was merely a standard size reduction spell, and he subsequently stowed the toothpick-sized scythe into his bag. His gaze then shifted to the treeman nearby, which hadn't reverted to its original form despite Salazar's defeat, it appeared to be a genuine life form. With a wave of his hand, the sealing runes on the bark instantly turned to ashes. Under his gaze's guidance, the treeman shifted its massive body and began to run towards the forbidden forest. Anyway, the Forbidden Forest is not lacking in such magical creatures. As the matter came to an end, Li Hong intended to leave. After bidding farewell to Ron and Hermione, he strolled toward the Forbidden Forest. Do you think it's worth dying to become the Grim Reaper? If I work for Mr. Li for 5 years, will he give me the Grim Reaper's scythe? Seeing Li Hong's figure disappear, Ron was still entangled in this matter. Forget 5 years, if he could obtain the power of the Grim Reaper, he would be willing to work for Li Hong for 10 years. Hermione looked at Ron speechlessly. What she saw was Li Hong, who could easily take down the Grim Reaper, and he was far more terrifying than the Grim Reaper himself. She then ignored Ron and headed towards the castle. Wait for me. Seeing that Ron was no longer entangled, he immediately shouted loudly and hurriedly chased after him. When Li Hong entered the Forbidden Forest, he was actually looking for magical plants to use in alchemy. The materials he needed to formulate the elixir were quite common, so they were not difficult to find. Coupled with a sweep of his divine sense, he had a clear understanding of the locations of those magical plants. Walking deeper into the Forbidden Forest, he continuously picked and gathered. After an unknown amount of time, 2 figures suddenly appeared and blocked Li Hong's path. Li Hong slightly raised his head to see 2 tall centaurs standing in front of him, with their upper bodies bare and each carrying a quiver and bow on their backs. As for their faces, they bore traits of both humans and horses, looking somewhat strange. Witch, don't go any further, it's too dangerous for you inside. Go back. One of the centaurs spoke in a hearty voice. Ferenz, why do you meddle? It's just a witch, if he dies, he dies. The other centaur, who had a beard, spoke in a dissatisfied tone. Thank you, but I have my own plans. Li Hong expressed his gratitude for their kindness but did not accept their advice. He then bypassed the 2 and continued on. Hey, see, I told you you're meddling. The bearded centaur immediately scoffed upon hearing this, mocking Ferenz's self-righteousness. Ferenz shook his head at this, realizing that since the other party did not appreciate his concern, it was better to let it go. Let's go, Bane. The 2 figures then quickly disappeared into the forest. However, the Forbidden Forest was not so peaceful. After Li Hong and the centaurs left, the leaves of the towering ancient tree nearby trembled, shaking off a number of fallen leaves. Shortly after, an 8-eyed giant spider crawled down from the tree, its 8 eyes staring in the direction Li Hong had departed, yet it did not follow. Instead, it quickly moved in another direction. In the blink of an eye, Li Hong, satisfied, placed the last magical plant into his pouch. Having gathered everything he needed, he could return to refine his pills. However, he did not hurry, casually sitting down on the ground, as if he were tired. At this moment, in the Forbidden Forest, birds were constantly startled into flight, and large groups of spiders were moving rapidly across the ground, as if participating in a grand migration, causing all creatures along the way to flee. Ferenz, why are all these 8-eyed giant spiders leaving their nests? After the swarm of spiders had passed, Ferenz and Bane emerged, watching the retreating figures, feeling a chill in their hearts. With so many 8-eyed giant spiders, even if they were ensnared, there would be no escape for them. It was known that the 8-eyed giant spider clan was a significant threat in the entire Forbidden Forest, and it was unclear who had released them. The centaur tribe was quite wary of these 8-eyed giant spiders but not truly afraid, since they were fast. As long as they were not ensnared, they could easily defeat them. They would shoot arrows from a distance, and as soon as the spiders drew near, they would quickly retreat, shooting arrows while withdrawing. By the time the 8-eyed giant spiders felt the pain and attempted to retreat, they would follow behind, continuing to shoot arrows, always managing to make them retreat in disarray. The only problem was that they did not have enough arrows. After several battles, the centaurs had frightened the giant spiders, making them reluctant to attack the centaur tribe again. However, they knew that if given the chance, these 8-eyed giant spiders would never let them go. What they feared the most was being surrounded. Once encircled, it would be troublesome. Of course, it was challenging for them to find such an opportunity, as the centaur tribe had patrols day and night. I estimate that this can't be good. Let's follow and take a look. Ferenz said immediately, his expression serious. This chaotic group mobilizing so many spiders could definitely mean trouble. It was likely that another clan was about to suffer misfortune. Fortunately, the direction these 8-eyed giant spiders were heading was not towards their tribe. Otherwise, they certainly wouldn't be discussing this so casually. Soon, two figures stealthily followed behind the eight-eyed giant spiders, preparing to ascertain their movements to avoid any relation to them. From an aerial view, one would notice that the swarm of eight-eyed giant spiders is heading directly towards the location of Li Hong. On his first day, Li Hong killed 3 eight-eyed giant spiders. Although there were no witnesses at the time, the news still leaked out. The first spider from the group that sought assistance disclosed the information, stating that there was only one person, which wasn't enough to warrant a response from the others, so the remaining eight-eyed giant spiders did not follow. Later, after a round of investigation, it became clear who the murderer of their kind was. Li Hong was sitting cross-legged on the ground, and with his spiritual sense, he could naturally see a large group of spiders approaching this way. This was the reason he was not in a rush to leave. However, there was still some time before they would arrive, so Li Hong simply took out a glazed tripod from his bag. With one hand, he tossed it out, and the glazed tripod expanded in the wind, transforming into a small tripod about 1 meter tall, landing steadily on the ground. The lid of the tripod flew off with a bang and landed beside it. Li Hong immediately walked up to the glazed tripod and took out the magical plants he had gathered from the bag. He didn't throw all the materials in at once but gathered about 3 portions as a precaution. After completely pouring one portion of the magical material inside, he lifted his finger lightly, and the lid of the tripod flew up, perfectly fitting back onto the body of the tripod. In the next moment, the fire symbols beneath began to flicker slightly, and a burst of flame instantly erupted, covering the bottom of the glazed tripod. The glazed tripod insulated the terrifying heat, protecting the magical plants inside so that they would not be instantly burned to ashes. They gradually melted, forming solutions of various colors. When the temperature reached a certain point, the impurities suddenly evaporated, leaving only the purest medicinal essence, which was then isolated to wait for the right moment. The other plants followed the same process, each having its own appropriate temperature. When the temperature was reached, impurities were removed, preserving the medicinal properties that Li Hong needed. In no time, all the plants were fully refined, and the next step was fusion. If the order of fusion was incorrect, it would lead to failure in pill formation. Typically, pill refinement is done one by one, but for Li Hong, such trouble was unnecessary. Li Hong immediately formed a hand seal to activate the glazed tripod. In an instant, all the solutions quickly fused together, and the flames at the bottom of the tripod surged suddenly. At the right temperature, the medicinal liquid fused into shape, achieving the most perfect state. The lid of the tripod flew off with a bang, emitting a thick white smoke, and the flames below suddenly extinguished. Inside the glazed tripod lay a red medicinal pill, and it was not small in size. Li Hong extended his hand, grasping it in his palm. This pill is the size of a longan, with a smooth surface that appears to have a waxy shine. Li Hong named it the inferior ancestor returning pill, aimed at enhancing the strength of bloodlines. Not only is it effective for wizards, but it also works on other magical creatures. Moreover, individuals with powerful bloodlines can consume it as well. Of course, this is not a pill that Li Hong intends to sell, it is a spiritual pill. Although it has just entered the grade, it still qualifies as a spiritual pill. If he were to sell it for a few dozen galleons, he would likely be exhausted, and this world may not have that many magical plants. After all, it is a spiritual pill produced by him. Consuming a whole inferior ancestor returning pill might allow the bloodline to become even purer, perhaps even approaching the level of Dumbledore. By conversion, it could approximately increase magical power by more than 20 times. It sounds like a lot, but in reality, it's just so-so. After all, both the pill formula and the crafting process are personally handled by Li Hong. On one hand, the formula ensures the exceptional effectiveness of the ancestor returning pill, and on the other, his personal crafting makes the efficacy nearly perfect. When he actually refines it, Li Hong plans to divide the effects of the ancestor returning pill, turning one pill into 2 or 3 dozen smaller ancestor returning pills, each of which wouldn't qualify as a spiritual pill anymore. As long as the materials are sufficient, he can refine in bulk. Producing 100 inferior ancestor returning pills in one batch is not a big problem. This also means he could produce 2,000 to 3,000 small ancestor returning pills in a single batch, and with a few more batches, he would likely satisfy the entire wizarding community in England. Of course, to avoid resource disparities leading to a split in wizard society, when it comes time to brew the pills, he will deliberately leave some unique toxic properties in the small ancestor returning pills. In this way, Each wizard will experience the maximum effect when they consume the first pill, and the effect of the second pill will diminish to 1% under the toxicity of the potion, continuously weakening thereafter. Otherwise, wealthy wizards could simply buy dozens of them outright, effectively achieving the benefits of the inferior ancestor returning pill, resulting in a divide between wealthy and impoverished wizards, which would be a great sin. If everyone eventually buys his small ancestor returning pills and he still needs money, then he could always release a second version of the ancestor returning pill, adjusting the toxicity of the small ancestor returning pills so that consumers don't develop a tolerance, essentially allowing them to take a second one. Thus, he could rely on the inferior ancestor returning pill to harvest magical potencies for his pill production, likely eliminating the need to consider other ways to make money. Li Hong was quite pleased with his plan. However, before that, he still needed to determine the efficacy of this pill, which means he needs to find a test subject. At this moment, a dense sound echoed around him, and Li Hong's eyes brightened. He immediately knew who to ask for a drug test. Then he took out a porcelain bottle from his bag and placed the pill inside. With a casual motion, the Luli Ding flew up, coming towards Li Hong, continually shrinking until it returned to its original size, which he caught in his hand and stuffed into his bag. The sound of rustling filled the air, startling the surrounding birds, one of which took flight but let out a mournful cry, followed by a crunching noise. The tall trees around stirred as a group of eight-eyed giant spiders emerged, surrounding Li Hong as if weaving a giant web. However, these eight-eyed giant spiders did not swarm towards him. Instead, they watched him coldly from all directions. Until several enormous spiders appeared. It was clear that these eight-eyed giants, comparable in size to elephants, were the leaders among them, sending shivers down the spine of any ordinary person who laid eyes on them. "Did you kill my children?" A hoarse and unpleasant voice came from one of the eight-eyed giant spiders. Li Hong was not surprised that they could speak human language. He calmly replied, "If you were referring to those few who tried to eat me, then yes, that was indeed my doing. They only indulged a little bit. How dare you kill them?" As soon as the eight-eyed giant spider heard this, it immediately became agitated and began to screech. "An eye for an eye. Since you have killed them, you must pay the price." At this moment, another colossal eight-eyed giant spider spoke. Hearing this, Li Hong couldn't help but agree with this reasoning and nodded. "Indeed, if you can take my life, then go ahead." Li Hong's expression remained calm as he spoke softly. This was indeed the principle of the matter. Li Hong also recalled the lesson his cheap master had taught him. Monsters that eat humans are demons. Once they have eaten once, they will eat again. Encountering a beast that consumes humans must result in its death, otherwise, it will continue to prey on humans. Whether these eight-eyed giant spiders had eaten humans before or not was unknown, but they were currently watching him with drooling mouths. Clearly, they were hungry for him, having a natural craving for human flesh, thus being demons from birth. Their existence was a sin. Of course, within this forbidden forest, there were not many humans for them to eat, so perhaps not many had actually feasted on human flesh. But if they wished to eat humans, they would eventually find someone to devour. After consuming the first human, they would crave a second, perpetually breeding. This was a great threat. If that is the case, I might as well eradicate them all. "Children, who killed him and gets to enjoy a thigh all by themselves?" A giant eight-eyed spider suddenly commanded. Li Hong couldn't help but chuckle upon hearing this. The words made him feel as if he were the monk Tang Seng traveling for scriptures. In the next moment, countless eight-eyed spiders surged towards Li Hong, pouring in like a tide. Seeing this, Li Hong's lips curled into a slight smile, and he gripped the hilt of his peachwood sword tightly before drawing it with a swift motion. The moment he drew the sword, it slipped from his hand and spun through the air like a grinding plate. Along its path, the eight-eyed spiders that came into contact with it exploded, releasing thick gunk that looked rather disgusting, with limbs continuously falling from the sky like ice shards. Usually, each eight-eyed spider had 8 legs that could drop, and in an instant, the spiders right in front of Li Hong were cleared away, leaving a ground strewn with corpses and fragmented remains. This scene left the few giant eight-eyed spiders dumbfounded. However, the smaller eight-eyed spiders did not back down. Their eyes were already reddened, only remembering the temptation of killing him to enjoy a thigh all to themselves. This allure propelled them, minds not fully developed, to charge forward without hesitation. Just as one eight-eyed spider approached from behind, its massive pincers aimed to bite down on Li Hong, overwhelmed with joy at the thought of savoring a thigh all alone. Li Hong raised 2 fingers and pointed to the flying peach wood sword. The sword suddenly froze in midair, and its tip turned to aim at Li Hong. In the next moment, the peach wood sword shot out like a bolt of lightning, so fast that the naked eye could barely catch its afterimage. Poof! In an instant, the 8-eyed spider behind Li Hong exploded, its slime scattering everywhere. As it fell towards Li Hong, a faint glow appeared at his side, deflecting the goo. The tide of spiders continued to surge towards Li Hong. However, every time a giant spider got close, it would suddenly burst, turning into scattered limbs and carcasses. Before long, Li Hong was surrounded by a pile of remains, with the other giant spiders only able to climb atop their fallen siblings. But as they climbed to the top, a shadow would reap them directly, making them a part of the corpse pile. In the blink of an eye, a mountain of corpses had formed, with Li Hong standing at its center, not a single droplet of slime staining his clothes. Several giant 8-eyed spiders stared in horror at the scene, stunned into silence as the reality set in. "Run, run away." Suddenly, one 8-eyed spider shouted anxiously, its voice trembling, fear written all over its 8 eyes, unable to comprehend the spectacle before it. A chill surged from its heart outwards. It seemed they had provoked a terrifying being, 1,000 times more horrifying than a fire dragon. "Retreat! Quick, retreat! Don't approach!" Once again, a giant spider shouted loudly, its voice filled with anger. It didn't know where it found the courage to ignite such fury, yet it was unaware that extreme fear could also lead to helpless rage. In the time it took for the giant spiders to react, several more had turned into piles of corpses. "Retreat!" The 8-eyed giant spider kept shouting, its eyes blood-red, using the loudest voice it could muster. At last, the smaller 8-eyed giant spiders began to obey the command, gradually retreating. The tide of spiders slowly withdrew, leaving behind a ground covered in corpses, all of their own kin and offspring. Trapped within the mountain of corpses, Li Hong unleashed a spell, and in an instant, a terrifying gale erupted beside him, instantly shattering the mountain of corpses, and the remnants splattered in all directions. In a moment, the ground was covered with a layer of spider carcasses. Ah! These giant spiders were splashed with the blood of their fallen companions, completely drenched. Suddenly, one of the giant 8-eyed spiders let out a shocked roar, seemingly unable to accept the current situation. It went mad and charged toward Li Hong. "Stop!" Seeing this, its companions urgently shouted. As soon as the words left their mouths, the giant 8-eyed spider exploded, a spray of slime pouring into its open mouth. Ah! In an instant, the contents forced into its mouth made it incapable of holding back, and it began to vomit violently. Li Hong looked at the scattering tide of spiders, his face cold and expression merciless, and stepped forward. Invisible magic surged beneath his feet, quickly forming a magical array. The escaping giant spiders were thwarted by an invisible membrane, abruptly halting their flight. The 8-eyed spiders behind them crashed into each other, causing chaos, their 8 legs flailing in the air. "You are a demon!" One 8-eyed giant spider, witnessing this scene, shouted at Li Hong, already somewhat numb. "It's over, it's all over." Another giant 8-eyed spider cried out in despair, knowing they could no longer escape, they had doomed their entire race. Li Hong faced their accusations without changing expression, his right hand outstretched, the peachwood sword flew swiftly and landed in his hand. It was evident that the peachwood sword was not tainted by any residue, as if it were not the sword that had penetrated their bodies from start to finish. After all, this was a magical artifact. If it couldn't even remain unstained, how could it be deemed a magical artifact? Li Hong immediately sheathed the peachwood sword behind him. But this did not mean he had reined in his killing intent. Then, amidst their already numb gazes, Li Hong opened his mouth and exhaled, flames bursting forth. In an instant, the corpses on the ground ignited, transforming into a sea of fire. And those 8-eyed giant spiders still alive did not escape either, naturally becoming engulfed in the spiritual fire. In a flash, the area had turned into a sea of flames, with most of the 8-eyed giant spiders rolling on the ground, howling in pain, attempting to extinguish the flames on their bodies. However, this was obviously a delusion. This was spiritual fire, not ordinary fire, and even water could not quench it. Li Hong looked on coldly at this scene, and he saw that the leading 8-eyed giant spider had already given up, its 8 eyes vacant as it stared at the sky while being consumed by the spiritual fire. In just half a minute, the sea of fire had already extinguished, leaving behind charred remains on the ground, as if they were lamenting their tragic fate to the heavens. From then on, all the attacking 8-eyed giant spiders were eradicated, with not a single one surviving. Li Hong immediately withdrew his mana, canceled the formation, and looked silently at the remains scattered around. Logically, he should have performed a purification for them now, but this was the underworld, not the netherworld, and he had better options. He then took out a small Grim Reaper's scythe from his bag, and as he held it, the sky changed. In places invisible to the naked eye, Li Hong could see many 8-eyed giant spider souls, their expressions blank, perhaps they would only regain consciousness after falling into the underworld. Li Hong glanced at the Grim Reaper's scythe in his hand, and mana surged into it, forcibly mastering the laws of its power. In the next moment, Li Hong's black robe fell away, transforming him into the Grim Reaper. Before powerful mana, any restrictions imposed on the Grim Reaper's scythe became ineffective. Li Hong's gaze flashed. Having temporarily assumed the position of the Grim Reaper, he saw the heavenly path of this world, appearing as a gray, hazy white light that had yet to truly take shape. It was also difficult for it to take shape, as the power of this world itself was insufficient to solidify the heavenly path. Li Hong then shifted his focus to the inexplicably sensed information, which included some common knowledge about the underworld, a clear inheritance of the Grim Reaper, detailing the circumstances of the underworld and the taboos of the Grim Reaper. After a brief scan, he understood it thoroughly. In the next moment, he raised the scythe lightly and brought it down heavily. A passage to the underworld has opened, revealing a swirling mass of black fog. Through here, one can reach the realm of the dead. However, Li Hong had no intention of taking a look. The black fog emitted a powerful pull, effective only on souls, and countless 8-eyed giant spider souls surged towards it, being sent to the underworld. Just as the area was cleared of souls, Li Hong was about to close the entrance to the underworld when he saw a soul rush out from within. A glance revealed it was the bald Salazar. After the Grim Reaper's scythe disappeared, he quickly figured out the reason for its disappearance and realized why Li Hong was not afraid of him reversing his words. After a howl of impotence, he could only come to find Li Hong. As a former Grim Reaper, he naturally knew which passages in the underworld led to the real world. While laboriously floating along in the form of a soul, he suddenly saw an exit to reality open before him. Before he could react, he watched as numerous 8-eyed giant spider souls crazily surged in, nearly sweeping him away. After some struggle, he finally escaped from the tide of spiders and, without hesitation, dove into the passage leading to the real world. "Have you figured it out?" Li Hong was not surprised at all, softly asking. This was not a coincidence that the passage opened before Salazar, but rather an intentional act by Li Hong. Salazar looked at Li Hong in shock, not expecting that a living person could also wield the Grim Reaper's scythe, directly breaking the rules of the scythe. Then, awoken by Li Hong's voice, he immediately lowered his proud head and sincerely said, "I've figured it out." There was no way he could not understand. Seeing this, Li Hong nodded but did not hastily return the Grim Reaper's scythe. Instead, he gently closed his eyes and manipulated the scythe's authority. He wiped the memories of the souls sent to the underworld and threw them into the reincarnation pool. This served as a form of compensation for them, saving them the time of waiting in line. Only then did he open his eyes and, without any reluctance, hand the Grim Reaper's scythe to Salazar. Salazar had learned his lesson and respectfully accepted it with both hands. In an instant, dressed in a black robe, he transformed back into the Grim Reaper. At that moment, he did not make a run for it, rather, he honestly stood beside Li Hong, stowed away the scythe, like a servant. Just as they were about to leave, they suddenly heard footsteps. Ferenz and Bane, two centaurs, appeared here, their eyes filled with astonishment as they looked at the charred remnants on the ground, as if they were witnessing a murder scene. The dense black char made them feel a chill in their hearts. Through some obvious remains, they could tell it was the work of the 8-eyed giant spiders. Could it be that most of the migrating 8-eyed giant spider clan is here? Both Ferenz and Bane felt a trace of fear. They exchanged a glance and saw the mutual understanding in each other's eyes. If the killer who had slain them made it to their tribe, they feared they wouldn't fare much better. Just as they were about to turn back to report, they suddenly halted in their tracks, spotting two figures at the center of the abundant black char ahead. A surge of vigilance instantly surged within them, and their horse hooves anxiously lifted and dropped. When they clearly saw those two figures, they were momentarily taken aback. Wizards. One of them was the wizard they had encountered before. They hadn't expected to meet him here. But why was he appearing in this place? Was it merely coincidental? Suddenly, a flash of lightning struck Ferlenz's mind, revealing an expression of disbelief in his eyes. While he hadn't suspected the wizard was the one responsible for this tragedy at first, the fact that the other stood in this central position while the surrounding char showed no signs of clear damage meant he hadn't entered after the corpses were burned. He had seemingly been there all along. With alarms ringing in his heart, he wanted to draw his bow and arrows but hesitated. The wisest choice at this moment would be to flee. Just as he contemplated this, the man looked over, his calm gaze making him feel as if he had plunged into an ice cave, sending chills from the inside out. Sweat stood on end on his arms, as if warning him. He had never seen such a gaze, it was serene yet filled with endless murderous intent. At that moment, he confirmed it was indeed the wizard who had caused the carnage, a frail-looking wizard who had obliterated most of the eight-eyed giant spider clan. The horse people had an innate ability to perceive far more than wizards could. Beside him, Bane was already frozen in fear, completely lacking the previous bravado, and under the weight of terror, he involuntarily lowered his wooden bow. "Don't." Ferlenz, frightened out of his wits, hurriedly tried to stop his reckless action. At that moment, paralyzed with fear and unable to take a step forward, he could only stiffen his resolve and ask, "Did you do this?" As soon as the question left his lips, Ferlenz wanted to slap himself for asking such a question. No. However, Li Hong gently admitted it. This immediately evoked a glimmer of relief within Ferlenz, who had been consumed by anxiety. Denial was good. They could choose to believe it, allowing them to leave, treating this as if they had never come here. "It was done by me alone." However, the next moment, Li Hong's words shattered his fantasy. He admitted it. It was indeed him. Fei Lun's and Ben's hearts raced, their faces slightly changed, struggling to control their expressions, afraid to reveal their true thoughts. Why? The scene fell into silence, and Fei Lun's could only break this unsettling quiet. "They wanted to eat me, so I killed them. Do you think that's right?" Li Hong asked calmly. However, in the eyes of Lun Wen and Ben, Li Hong seemed to be pressing a knife to their necks, asking them. "Right, absolutely right. I've long been displeased with this group of eight-eyed giant spiders. You've done a great service by eliminating a major pest for the forest." Before Fei Lun's could say anything, Ben hurriedly echoed, forcing out a strained smile that looked more like a grimace than a smile. I also think it's right." Li Hong nodded, finally someone had reasoned it out. Then, under their trembling gazes, he pulled out the peach wood sword from behind him and threw it forward, creating a big bow against the ground. Li Hong stepped out with one foot, firmly stepping on the peach wood sword. "Let's go," Li Hong then said to Salazar beside him. In the next moment, his figure flew up directly, stepping on the wooden sword as he departed. And from Salazar, black mist rolled out, flying straight up after Li Hong. Fei Lun's and Bayan watched Li Hong's departing figure, unable to help but let out a sigh of relief, feeling as if they had narrowly escaped death. That was terrifying. Bayan was still shaken. Although the ones that had died were just the eight-eyed giant spiders, enemies of their tribe, they were still many lives. They had closely followed the spider swarm, and if the eight-eyed giant spiders had scattered, it was impossible that not a single one would have been spotted. However, the fact that not a single eight-eyed giant spider had been seen only meant one thing: they had all perished here. Bayan suddenly recalled their previous encounter with Li Hong. At that time, his attitude didn't seem pleasant, and now he should consider himself lucky that his head was still on his shoulders. "We need to get back quickly and warn our kin not to provoke him. Otherwise, disaster is looming." Fei Lun's was suddenly struck by a thought. As Li Hong had just said, these eight-eyed giant spiders were wiped out because they wanted to eat him. If their tribe were to anger him, would they not be easily eliminated? He hadn't witnessed Li Hong in action, but the charred remains on the ground spoke volumes. This person was extremely dangerous. Furthermore, the eight-eyed giant spiders weren't foolish. They must have had no ability to escape, or else why wouldn't they have run after being killed like that? Thinking of this made him shiver involuntarily. Yes, that's right. The wizard is too terrifying. I think we should relocate our entire tribe. Our village is still too close to the wizarding world. Bayan hastily agreed and suggested that before today, he had looked down on wizards, but now he no longer dared to say such things. Immediately, the two of them rushed through the forbidden forest, emitting a hurried sound. By the way, the direction he just left seems to be the stronghold of the eight-eyed giant spider tribe. Do you think he would The sound of Bayan's voice faded away as he spoke against the swirling wind. You're right, we are too close to the wizard society, we need to migrate as soon as we get back. After a moment of silence, Fei Lunz felt that Bayan's proposal was indeed wise and absolutely planned to mention it to the elders upon returning. Li Hong used his spiritual consciousness to lock onto the location of the eight-eyed giant spider tribe, flying towards it on his sword, making sure to take his time to accommodate Salazar, who was following him. Why did you kill so many eight-eyed giant spiders? Salazar asked curiously in the air. Unlike Fei Lunz and the others, he didn't fear Li Hong, because he had already died once, and if Li Hong wanted to kill him, he would not have returned the scythe of death to him. Thus, he boldly inquired at that moment. They enjoy eating human flesh. Shouldn't they be killed? Li Hong replied casually, his gaze fixed on the cotton candy-like clouds ahead. Indeed, it should be killed. Salazar could only agree, but he didn't expect that Li Hong would care about such things. If he was so ruthless in his lifetime, it must have been to collect materials from them, but he wouldn't waste his energy killing so many people for such a reason. In an instant, Salazar felt that beneath Li Hong's seemingly calm exterior lay a heart of ruthlessness. Perhaps it was precisely because he didn't care about anything that he could be so fierce when he struck. In the blink of an eye, Li Hong had arrived at the lair of the eight-eyed giant spiders. The tip of his sword pointed downwards as his figure fell, with Salazar closely following behind. They did not conceal their presence, so as soon as they landed, the eight-eyed giant spider tribe became agitated. One by one, they crawled down from their roosting trees, eventually gathering beneath the largest tree, whose roots exposed above the ground were even thicker than those of an ordinary tree trunk. There lay the largest eight-eyed giant spider. However, this eight-eyed giant spider appeared to have little vitality. Most of its 8 eyes were murky, shrouded by a thin white membrane, and the spines on its legs were completely gone, giving it a bare appearance. This was undoubtedly the spider that was adopted by Hagar, Aragog. This is our territory. What are you wizards doing here? An 8-eyed giant spider immediately spoke up. Before Li Hong could respond, another 8-eyed giant spider discovered something and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. This looks like the target Obadiah and the others went out to find. How did it end up here? As soon as those words were spoken, it immediately alerted the other giant spiders, who started chattering among themselves. Silence. The ancient spider spoke up, and in an instant, all the spiders fell silent. Although old, it still commanded respect. Young wizard, have you encountered Obadiah? Aragog asked slowly, his tone surprisingly gentle. Who is Obadiah? Li Hong asked knowingly. He is my child. There seems to be some misunderstanding, as he went out to find you. Aragog's voice was hoarse, sounding as if it was resonating. No wonder he was the oldest 8-eyed giant spider here, he easily turned their hunting expedition into a mere misunderstanding. I've seen quite a few 8-eyed giant spiders, but I don't know which one you're talking about. Li Hong replied honestly. However, although I don't know which one you're referring to, I can tell you where it is. Without waiting for Aragog to ask, Li Hong took the initiative to inform him. Oh, really? Where did they go? I personally sent them to the netherworld, Li Hong said softly. In the next moment, the scene immediately fell silent, with even the noisy sound of spider legs scraping against the ground vanishing. Every giant spider fixated its 8 eyes on Li Hong. Ha ha ha, young man, you are truly humorous. However, Aragog did not get angry, rather, he burst into laughter. Humorous people even find meat easier to enjoy, ha ha ha. Aragog then added another joke. You are the same, a laughing spider won't shed tears when it leaves. Li Hong immediately responded, it's been a long time since I've encountered such a funny joke, it's quite appetizing. Little ones, make sure to treat this humorous guest well. Aragog gently wiped his eyes with a spider leg, as if he was laughing to the point of tears, and then instructed his offspring. In the next moment, all the giant spiders except Aragog rolled up their sleeves and crawled towards Li Hong. Li Hong promptly grabbed the hilt of the peachwood sword behind him and drew it out. This time he didn't choose to fly with the sword but held it tightly in his hand, gently waving it towards the approaching 8-eyed giant spiders. In an instant, a bright white sword light swept out, expanding outward like a long rainbow. In the blink of an eye, many 8-eyed giant spiders were severed in half, their mouths that had just been laughing now split into two, with smiles still frozen on their faces. The scene fell silent for a second, and in the next moment, all the giant spiders reacted, letting out cries of surprise. Unlike the 8-eyed giant spiders they encountered earlier, they scrambled to retreat with all 8 legs, moving several times faster than they'd advanced moments ago. They became a chaotic mess, trampling over the corpses of their fallen companions amidst the pandemonium. Meanwhile, Aragog remained motionless, perched atop the thickest stalk, looking somewhat high and mighty, his smile turning into a dazed expression, his small eyes confused due to old age. Is this magic? Is this from a wizard? Is this for real? Aragog awoke from his nightmare-like state. He wanted to flee, but his old and frail body wouldn't allow him to run. Li Hong watched the scattered spiders and shook his head, employing the same strategy once more. Stepping forward, the trapping formation was instantly established. An invisible barrier enveloped the area, preventing all the scattered 8-eyed giant spiders from escaping. Li Hong stepped forward again, and the invisible magical force immediately radiated outward, creating a new formation. Suddenly, it was a killing formation, with the peachwood sword in his hand as the core of the formation. In the next moment, sword energy manifested in the sky, rapidly descending with precision, taking a life away. Although each strand of sword energy was significantly weaker than what he had previously released, it was more than enough to eliminate these 8-eyed giant spiders. The sky was filled with falling sword energy, and each 8-eyed giant spider was harvested, only able to emit mournful cries before being unable to act. Meanwhile, Sriracha was also stunned by this scene, her mouth slightly agape, feeling that this method was truly terrifying. Could it be that he had spent too long in the underworld, evolving reality to such an extent? In less than 10 seconds, all the 8-eyed giant spiders, except for Aragog, were annihilated. Li Hong then walked towards the terrified Aragog, not because Aragog was particularly lucky, but simply because Ji hadn't chosen to kill him. Aragog instinctively wanted to retreat but found his body unable to move, as if he had been struck by a petrifying spell, but when had such a spell been cast on him? As Li Hong approached step by step, despair filled Aragog's aged and hazy eyes, though it was difficult for outsiders to discern anything through those murky eyes. In the blink of an eye, Li Hong stood before Aragog, taking a porcelain bottle from his bag, uncorking it, and pouring out a red pill, which was indeed a low-grade Return to Ancestor pill. "Open your mouth," Li Hong softly commanded. For reasons unknown, Aragog instinctively opened his mouth. Sriracha looked curiously at the pill in Li Hong's hand, as she sensed the scent of magical plants. Could it be something similar to a potion? With a flick of his finger, the low-grade Return to Ancestor pill shot out and landed in Aragog's mouth. Before he could even swallow, he felt something unfamiliar dissolving directly in his mouth. Before long, Aragog sensed a change in his body and panicked. Did he just get poisoned? He felt his blood flowing rapidly, as if it were surging violently in his veins. This state didn't last long, for he soon found that his magical power was suddenly skyrocketing, not just a normal increase, but a leap-like surge. Crack! Alarogok's body suddenly let out a series of sounds, and it began to twist and turn. In the midst of the twisting, its body grew larger without it even realizing it. The most apparent change was in its body, which seemed to be rejuvenating. The filth in its 8 eyes gradually dissipated, turning an exceedingly deep black. The hair that had fallen off suddenly grew back, appearing much denser. It looked like a yellowed cucumber had been painted green. The entire spider was now utterly transformed. Beside it, Sriracha looked on in astonishment. As a god of death, there were many things he could see. He could also see the surge in magical power within Alarogok, which had doubled in a short time and showed no signs of stopping. As its magical power surged, it also began to clearly see the appearance of this young wizard, feeling that the other party was no longer as detestable as before. Compared to its offspring, it cared more about its own body. Sometimes, hatred could be forgotten. Although it didn't know what Li Hong had fed it, it was definitely something good. Anyone willing to give it such a good thing must have nurtured it with care. It decided to let go of past grievances and, rather than wait for the other side to recruit it, would take the initiative to pledge loyalty, ensuring that they would see its loyalty. At this moment, Li Hong was also carefully observing the changes in this 8-eyed giant spider. The changes brought by the ancestral return were not merely limited to magical power, there were other aspects as well. For example, its venom glands had become more developed, and its venom's potency had likely increased. Moreover, its whole form had unconsciously grown to twice its size, and what was already massive now resembled a small mountain. In addition, the external bristles had become tougher, with a hint of magical energy flowing through them, suggesting they might be able to withstand a certain amount of magical attacks. Once the increase in magical power ceased, it had strengthened to about 3 times its original power. But 3 times, Li Hong pondered, resting his chin on his hand, it was actually quite reasonable. The effects of the potion he had estimated were intended for humans, while the 8-eyed giant spider ranked among the extraordinary creatures, with magical power equivalent to over 20 times that of an adult wizard, surpassing even Dumbledore slightly. Now that its magical power had surged threefold, just its magical power alone surpassed that of the phoenix in the principal's office. Is this a potion? Salazar fell into deep doubt and couldn't help but ask, this effect seems a bit incredible to me. He was well aware that during his lifetime, he had also conducted extensive research on potions, creating and improving many potion formulas, and he believed that it would be hard for anyone after him to surpass him in this field. In that era, he was also a genius who led the times. Even when the previous generation's Grim Reaper passed on the position to him, it was said that it was because of his exceptional talent that the title of Grim Reaper was given to him. But now, he could no longer comprehend what kind of existence Li Hong was, merely in terms of strength. He could crush Salazar, who wielded the Grim Reaper's scythe, and now, his potion making was equally terrifying. This made the potion making skills he once took pride in seem trivial. Such an all-encompassing blow was truly cruel for someone as proud as him. About right, Li Hong replied simply. Are you using magical plants? Yes. Did you research it yourself? With each question, Salazar felt his mentality inch closer to collapse, the skeleton's expression under the shroud darkened a few shades. Do you think it can defeat a fire dragon now? Li Hong curiously asked, mainly because he had never seen a fire dragon. It should be no problem, Salazar replied without hesitation, noting that its current size could compete with that of a fire dragon, not to mention its magical power, which would definitely be superior. Salazar could imagine that scene vividly. Aragog would leap, agilely jumping onto the back of the fire dragon, its 8 long legs folding tightly, wrapping around it to prevent it from flying. The massive pincers would bite down hard on the scales, tearing them off, and finally injecting venom into the fire dragon's body, bringing the battle to an end. Please like my videos and subscribe for more videos.